Snake, it's been a long time since you saved your game.
Yeah? So what?
If your body can't survive the torture, it'll be game over. You really want to travel down that long road again?
If I'm gonna have a series where I talk about stealth mechanics in video games, at some point, I'm gonna have to talk about one of the OGs. Now, this is by no means some end-all be-all analysis on the game, a word-for-word plot summary, or a repository of Snapple facts about its development history, like how Kojima blocked out cutscenes with Legos. This is me talking about the game's stealth mechanics for a bit, and about playing the game in general in the current year. With long-running series, I think it's important to go back to the earliest entries to see the foundations of their gameplay and get a better appreciation for how far they've come, or how far they've deviated from the core mechanics.
Hey, hang on 1 second. ليش عم تعمل هيك؟ تعمل شغلك.
And for Metal Gear Solid, I think one of the first things you gotta figure out is how you want to play it. I'm not gonna get into the nitty-gritty of all these versions, but as of 2024, you can play the game by either getting the Master Collection on multiple platforms, the GOG version for PC, or run the PS1 ROM on an emulator. Each approach has their respective pros and cons, ranging from pricing to technical issues. But so long as you're not hung up on playing the game on original hardware, follow your heart, and look online to see if you need to patch the game if you're running it on PC. Personally, I'm running a ROM of the game on DuckStation for a couple of reasons. 1. I can use save states to jump between different parts of the game and show off alternate approaches. And 2. That one fight. You know the one. I got 2 simulated controller ports set up so I can swap between those at any given point in this version without a problem. I will play the PC port up to that fight just to see if it does anything different though. Now, I've learned from my past videos that someone will always take umbrage to me suggesting to play these old games in a way they don't approve. And honestly, whatever. Not everyone is going to have access to original hardware, not everyone will want to fork over the money for an original copy of the game, and not everyone will want to get a RetroTink or a FrameMeister. I think most people want their gaming experiences to be frictionless, and will accept whatever compromises are necessary to have it that way. Alright, that's the boring stuff out of the way. Let's talk about Metal Gear Solid. As soon as you touch ground, you can already see where it all started with the game's controls. X to change stance, circle to punch, keep spamming it to do a 3-hit combo, get behind an enemy and hold square to grab them, mash it to break their necks, or press it intermittently to put them in a sleeper hold. If you press a direction while pressing square, you'll judo flip the enemy. Do it enough times and you'll knock them out momentarily. Hold triangle to go into first person view, and use a D-pad or left stick to adjust your view angle. When you're near a wall, press up against a surface. If you're at a corner, the camera will push out to give you a better view of what's around that blind spot. Press circle while against a wall to knock on it. Doing so will cause nearby enemies to inspect the source of the noise. Hold L2 or R2 to move up or down to select your active item or weapon, respectively. Hold L1 or R1 to equip or unequip your active item and weapon. This is also how you reload your weapons. Once you do get a weapon and equip it, press square to fire the weapon, and hold square to lock onto the nearest target. Being the first of the series, the controls and stealth mechanics are basic, but they provide a strong foundation for future entries. Detection is mostly line of sight, as evident in the Soliton radar, but you also have to pay attention to the sounds you make on certain surfaces, as well as whether walking on puddles or snow will leave tracks, as they can attract the enemy's attention. The early areas present you with an obstacle, and then place tools nearby to teach you how to overcome those obstacles. If you're brave enough to get the chaff grenades in the center of the helipad, you can use them to disrupt the nearby security cam and sneak into the lower air vent. But if you've opted for the upper air vent, you can still pick up the chaff grenades off to the side and use them on the camera overlooking the door that leads to the mine detector. During this run, I noticed that the game's alert system only had 3 levels: Alert, Evasion, and Unaware. By default, the enemies start off unaware, but will go into alert when they spot you. If you can break contact, the area drops down to Evasion and then resets back to Unaware. The closest thing that comes to a caution state is when a guard gets spooked if you make a sound or leave footprints behind, and they break from their usual patrol to inspect. Once we get past the starting screen and make it to the elevator, just move around this forklift and pay attention to enemy patrols. Then the game really starts.
Behind D. Colonel, what's a Russian gunship doing here?
I think the heliport is one of the best starting areas for a stealth game. You go from handling 3 patrols in a small room to a handful of new threats in a wide open area. I mentioned before how you can be risky and get the chaff grenades in the center of the helipad while avoiding the spotlights. You can also jump into the back of this truck and get the SOCOM pistol. If you approach the base from the far right, you can get a glimpse of how heightened the next-gen soldiers are when they track your footprints in the snow.
Tell me about these next-generation special forces.
They're all geniuses with IQs over 180.
Coming back to this game, I never noticed how much replay value it had by giving us 2 different points of entry into the base. If we take the vent on the upper level, which is the easier path, you can listen to some guards talking about a woman in a cell.
Woman in a cell?
But if you drop a chaff grenade and crawl under the guard sleeping over the vent on the lower level, you'll get a codec from Miller talking about field mice.
There's no one I'd rather have in a foxhole than you.
And once you do get into the base, this can result in a butterfly effect where more paths open up to give you vastly different experiences for subsequent playthroughs. If you didn't get the SOCOM in the truck at the helipad, then it replaces the thermal goggles spot in the hangar. If you did get the SOCOM outside, but came in from the vent on the lower level and go straight for the elevator, then you'll miss out on the thermals on the upper level, because once you get back out of that room after fighting Ocelot, you're locked out of that room until you come back with a higher level card. But by then, you'd have to cross the room with the IR lasers, which is where having the thermals would really help out. But you can avoid this by re-entering the area again before fighting Ocelot. And even if you miss out on the thermals early on, you're not entirely out of options, as Snake snuck in his secret weapon.
Cigarettes? How are those going to help you?
You never know.
It's a testament to how much thought was put into these starting areas that you can have several different outcomes from how you approach 3 adjacent screens. I said in my Crisis video that stealth games tend to go hand in hand with immersive sims. I won't outright call Metal Gear Solid an IM-sim, but Kojima does put things in his games that give off the feeling of an IM-sim. Like how you can use cigarettes to spot IR lasers, or taking diazepam to steady your aim when you're using the sniper rifle. When you're fighting Vulcan Raven in the permafrost warehouse, Miller tells you that your rations will freeze up and you won't be able to use them unless you keep them close to you, which means having them equipped during the fight. If you want an example for how out there this game gets with these kinds of interactions, there's a cave full of wolves that will attack you on sight. If you have a cardboard box in your inventory, you can get a wolf to piss on the box. Then as long as you have the box equipped, you won't aggro the wolves on return trips. This game is so responsive to your actions, and I don't think you can ever truly appreciate that until you play a game that doesn't have these moments.
Come on out! Show yourself!
That's strange. There's no guard.
What happened to the music?
So that one fight I mentioned earlier, here's how it plays out. Mantis will show off his psychic skills by keeping track of your performance in the game based on how many kills, alerts, continues, and rations you go through. Then he checks to see if you have any other Konami games saved onto your memory card. Then he shows up the power of the DualShock motors. Typically on PlayStation, you have to switch to the second controller port so that Mantis won't read your inputs. It's a little clunkier to do that on an emulator, but the principle remains the same. You just have to make sure that you've set up the controls for the second port beforehand. On PC, Mantis skips all the showmanship and the fight immediately begins. You don't even get the fake-out Hideo screen. He still reads your inputs though, so you are expected to use the keyboard during this encounter if you want a fighting chance. I didn't understand the default mapping for the keyboard, so I made this diagram if you're not using a PlayStation emulator. The Master Collection is the most frictionless experience for this fight, because all you have to do is open up the new menu for the collection and designate which controller port you're using. No need to set up control schemes like you would on an emulator, or with the PC port. The other boss fights are mostly straightforward affairs. You'll learn their attack patterns and pathfinding, and figure out how to exploit that. Your support team will give you hints via codec, and you can figure out which weapons you need to use based on the ammo in the area. Just like the stealth mechanics, these boss fights lay the foundation for encounters in future games. Hell, some of them even carried over into Death Stranding.
Good. Now we can fight as warriors. Hand to hand. It is the basis of all combat. Only a fool trusts his life to a weapon.
I don't need the gun, Sam. I can beat you. I can beat you.
Something else that really makes coming back to this game so worthwhile is seeing how far certain concepts carried forward into the series.
I've come from another world to do battle with you.
What is it, revenge?
It is nothing so trivial as revenge.
I did it! Revenge!
For instance, if you get past the first cargo elevator fast enough, Campbell will say this line.
Excellent, Snake. Age hasn't slowed you down one bit.
When you rescue Miller and Phantom Pain, this is the first thing he says.
Age hasn't slowed you down one bit.
There's way too many lines to pour over for this game, but here's some of the ones that stood out to me this time.
I need that man. Keep your hands off him.
When Miller talks about the Alaskan field mice and how they'll off some of their young, he comes off way too interested in that practice, and it makes perfect sense near the end of the game. Mantis' backstory, being a psychic who's overly sensitive to violent emotions to the point where they take over his personality, is an interesting setup, because you actually see this play out in Phantom Pain when he takes on the physical characteristics of whichever character he's vibing with. Also, when Mantis tells Snake and Meryl that he's not sure what the future holds for both of them, it's probably meant to foreshadow whether Meryl will live or die in the game based on what you do during the interrogation. But it also dovetails nicely into the events of MGS4, where Meryl's moved on past Snake with Johnny. That one's crazy in hindsight, since Johnny is one of the Genome soldiers who share DNA with Big Boss and Snake. So technically, Meryl did get with the version of Snake in the end. And my new favorite Ocelot line is when he refers to Snake as a carrier boy. It sounds like an awkward translation for errand boy, but it actually has another meaning once you learn about FoxDie. And speaking of carrier boys, I think the craziest casting gag Kojima's done recently is getting Troy Baker to play both Ocelot in MGS5 and Higgs in Death Stranding, and the only connection between these two is the return of this bit.
Snake, there's a bomb planted in your items. Hurry, throw it away!
That was a close one, Snake.
Ocelot, you'll pay for that.
Oh, hi. Sam Bridges, I presume? Says here the client is fragile herself. Careful. The contents are fragile.
I'm having a blast revisiting this game after so many years, but something this recent run made me acknowledge is that once you switch over to Disc 2, the game really starts trolling you. They start off harmless on Disc 1 with the instant death trap doors in the storage room that lead up to Ocelot's fight, because you can spot them with the thermal goggles if you pick them up early on. The mines in the snow yard are also fine, because they're supposed to teach you to get either the mine detector or thermal goggles to spot them. Speaking of mines, shoutouts to my friends who reminded me of this amazing moment between Snake and Meryl.
So, what do you think? Pretty good, huh?
But Disc 2 is where the game starts getting cheeky, because that's where you reach the blast furnace and have to cross this narrow ledge while pressed up against the wall. Make sure you don't touch whatever the hell this thing is when it passes by. Then the game starts putting gun cameras in rooms without radar, so it's really easy to run into them in a blind corner. This one's especially bad because you get spotted as soon as you come back up the elevator when you're backtracking to do the Palki runaround. That runaround is the most adventure game-esque thing about the game, actually. Even more so than having to have the CD case on hand to find Meryl's codec frequency. I don't have much else to say about Metal Gear Solid. Usually, when I talk about the stealth mechanics of a video game, it takes up the majority of the video, but that's not the case with Metal Gear Solid because it's essentially line-of-sight stealth done in the best way possible at the time. Once you understand how to use your radar to gauge your position and the limits of enemy detection, you're good to go for the entire game. It can't be overstated how important the game is to the stealth genre, and to games in general with its cinematic cutscenes and bold storytelling. Where else are you gonna fight a guy who talks about reloading his gun like this?
I love to reload during a battle. There's nothing like the feeling of slamming a long silver bullet into a well-greased chamber.
Where else is a guy having the runs critical to the plot of the game, let alone the series? Play Metal Gear Solid, whether it's for the first time ever, or if you're feeling nostalgic for it like I am. Do you think the controls and camera feel old? Good. You should. You gotta see where it all started to really appreciate how far we've come. You gotta learn to crawl before you can crouch run.
Kept you waiting, huh? I'm at the sneak point.
Mama!